Welcome back to Jersey Boys, an MMA podcast. I'm here with Jason. Everybody knows you as MMA Numbers. Jay, how you doing tonight?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing well. We're going to break down UFC 226. You're doing some great work on Twitter with the visuals that you're putting out there and the stats. I've even asked you a couple times to use them in some of my posts and stuff like that. So hopefully you can break down the fights and give everybody what they're looking for.
Looking forward to it.
All right, let's do it. Let's get right into this. So first fight is Lando Funada and Jakar Close. Venada's 9K on DK. Close is 7.2K. Venada's the betting favorite at minus 185, and Close is the plus 160 underdog. Where do you have this going? Predictions, DK, cash game, GPP. You can go any direction you want, Jay. So what are you thinking?
First thing that stands out in this fight for me is just Venada's pace. He's top 5 on the card in striking pace, but what's crazy about that is that he allows more strikes against him than he actually attempts, which for a guy who's already averaging almost 14 per minute is crazy. So Close isn't usually a high output guy, but we should see him land more strikes than he usually does here, which is a big boost just in terms of fantasy points if you're playing on Draftkings. And then getting into his grappling a little bit, Close, he does a little bit of striking in the clinch and on the ground, and he's good with his takedowns at 43% accuracy, but Funada's crazy active on his back, so that's going to keep the fight really high pace, more fantasy points everywhere, regardless how this one plays out.
Now, I totally agree with everything you just said. I think that Jakar Close is going to be my cash game staple this week. I think he's got a great chance to win this fight, especially at that price. I also think it's going to go 3 rounds. And like you just said, I think that this is the kind of fight where it could be a rinse and repeat kind of situation. In addition to that, Close does have a big, powerful right hand. He looks for that overhand right, heavy right hand. So if Funada takes all those shots, like you just mentioned, I think that Close may even have a shot at a finish here. The numbers are pretty much the same. They're both the same height, 5'9". Funada has a 1-inch reach advantage, so that really shouldn't be too big of a difference. Who you taking in this fight? Who do you like? Who you like for DraftKings?
For DraftKings, I'm liking Close. I'm right there with you. I think Venada's only got a 53% defense rate, so with Close's power and pretty good 44% accuracy from distance, he's got a good chance at landing hard on Funada. And Funada's aggressive, but he's not a huge finisher, and I think betting lines for him to finish aren't great, plus 220. So even if Close loses, he's probably going to have 3 rounds to rack up some fantasy points here, and that gives him a huge boost in cash games as well.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement here with this first fight. GPPs, I'll definitely play Close. May throw Funada. What's your GPP strategy for this? I know there's some big prize pools out there. What are you looking to do?
For this week, I'm looking to load up with 2 5-round fights on the card. I obviously want a ton of exposure to both of those. I think even no matter how big the tournament, I'm going to be going GPP fighters, championship 5-round fighters in all my lineups. And then I'm also looking to play a lot at the top end of pricing here with guys like Costa and Ngannou. Just pretty polarized stars and scrubs kind of lineup week for me, I think.
Now, how many GPP lineups do you usually go with? Just so I have an idea when you're going, and the audience has an idea.
I'm usually going pretty big, like 20 to 50 lineups, but I keep my core plays pretty tight, so I'll use a lot of lineups where it's the same 4 guys, and then the last 2 spots I'll kind of spread out among people that I'm not quite as high on, but I think are going to be low ownership or have some sneaky upside.
Yeah, I think this week with the $10 tournament that there is, I think I'm going to put in, I'm going to say maybe 60 or 70 lineups. So I think I'm going to go pretty heavy this week with GPP. So we're kind of in the same ballpark. So yeah, I really do like this fight for Close. I think this card is a great card, but this next fight is one fight I just don't even know why it's on the card. So the second fight is Emily Wittmeyer and Jamie Moil. It's 115-pound. Wittmeyer is 7K on DraftKings, plus 175. Moil's 9.2K on DraftKings, minus 210. I don't have a lot to say on this fight, so I guess maybe I'll just go first here. I think Wittmeyer's an active fighter. She can be taken down, which plays into Moil's strengths. I think she can score pretty well in DK with takedowns, but I just don't think that this is a very action-packed fight. I don't think it's a high high skill level fight. I think the striking is kind of low. The striking level is low. Moil lost to Vivian Pereira, who, was a favorite. I guess it was last week, I believe, and she wound up losing, or 2 weeks ago, the card in Singapore. But she did beat Caitlin Kern, so she's 1-1 in the UFC. Emily Wittmeyer is 0-1 in the UFC. She lost on the Tough Show, I believe, at 125 pounds. I believe she went 1-2. So there's some video out there. You guys can go and take a look at what you see. Wittmeyer should have a little bit of a height advantage, and she will be dropping weight going down to 115. I just think this is a very low level, low skill fight. But Jay, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I could guess exactly what fight you're about to talk about when you said you didn't know why it was on the card.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm liking this one from a DraftKings standpoint at all, but one kind of, if you're willing to stomach some risk on a really long shot bet on this card, I think Moil's plus 775 to win by submission. She doesn't have great submission skills, but I mean, she's got a submission win over JJ Aldrich, who, again, she's not great on the ground, but she's at least UFC caliber. And then Wittmeyer, between her amateur fights, her pro fights, and her fights on Tough, she's only 4-7 and 3 submission losses, and 1 was ground and pound. So I mean, if Modafferi didn't finish her with elbows, she probably would have got the submission. So I think even a decent submission fighter like Moil is a pretty good bet at plus 775 for a sub against Wittmeyer.
Yeah, great bet. Definitely for GPPs. I'm probably fading Wittmeyer. She may be one of the few people that I fade on this entire card. I'm gonna have 0 of her. Well, let's get into this next fight, because now we're looking up on just about all. I think 11 of these 12 fights are good fights. Even that Venata close fight, I think, is a very good fight. But Dan Hooker and Gilbert Burns, really looking forward to this fight. Hooker's 8.5K, minus 150, minus 130 favorite. I'm sorry, I can't even read my own writing. Gilbert Burns is 7.7K, plus 110. I was actually cage side for the UFC Atlantic City card, and Hooker had a great finish on Jim Miller with, I believe it was an inside knee that he took him down with. But Jay, I'll throw it to you. You get started, and then I'll pick up where you left off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this fight's a really fun matchup stylistically. I mean, Burns, incredible grappler who's got some power, and then Hooker, really good striker who can hold his own on the ground. So I think it's going to be a close one and a fun one. I think Hooker's 42% striking accuracy rate and that power he showed, like that knee against Miller was crazy, and 50% knockout rate over his career. And Gilbert Burns has some pretty shaky striking defense when he's forced to trade at distance. And then Burns has a pretty good takedown game for a guy with a strong jiu-jitsu game like he does. A lot of those guys that can dominate on the ground do struggle to get it there, but not so much the case for him. But Hooker's also got good defensive wrestling. I mean, he faces a ton of takedowns, averaging almost or better than nine attempts per 15 minutes against him, but stopped more than 3/4 of those. So I think if Burns does get it to the ground, it's going to be some trouble. But I think for the most part, Hooker should be able to keep it standing. And I like him as a slight favorite here. I'll probably have a little bit of GPP exposure. I'm afraid of him a bit in cash because of Burns' submission game. But in GPPs, Hooker's pace and his power to finish that fight early gives him some interesting upside.
Yeah, exactly what you just said. I'm kind of going Burns for that reason. I do like Burns to get the takedown. I think it's he's gonna have a disadvantage with the height, but I think that will work to his advantage if he can push Hooker up against the cage and maybe kind of struggle and wrestle him down for the takedown. And if he can get it to the ground, like you just mentioned, that BJJ game is pretty legit. Burns has a lot of finishes. I believe in his last, I forget the number. I didn't write down all the numbers, but I know he's got 4 KO finishes and 5 subs in like his last 10 or 11 fights. 13-2 overall, 6-2 in the UFC. And, he lost to Prazeres, which, is no bad feat. Michel Prazeres has been looking pretty good. And he even beat Cowboy Oliveira by sub. So, I really do like Burns in this fight. So he may be on opposite sides of this. I don't dislike Hooker. I think Hooker can get a finish here. He will have a 4-inch reach advantage. But I think I'm going to play Burns in more lineups than I play Hooker. Especially, like I said before, I'm going to play a lot of GPP lineups this week. All right, so we got some disagreement. This is going well so far. Moving right along here. Max Griffin, Curtis Melenda. Max Griffin is 7.5K, plus 145, underdog. Melenda is 8.7K on DraftKings, minus 165 favorite. A lot of wins for these guys. Griffin is 14-4. Melenda's 15-3. So in UFC, well, not all UFC fights, but in MMA, they got a lot of MMA fights, a lot of experience. Where are you going with this one, Jay?
Yeah, I don't have quite as strong a read on this one as I do on some of the fights, just because Melenda's only got the one UFC fight and don't get stats for most fights outside the UFC. I don't particularly like Griffin as a fighter. I think he's solid, but his numbers just don't stand out as special in any area. And he's got a 53% striking defense rate, which that's really trouble. He lands fewer strikes than he absorbs more strikes than he lands. And he's also got a little bit of a shaky takedown defense rate. And then when he is taken down, he gives up 2 grappling advances every time he's taken down on average, which a real ability to get controlled. But I haven't seen a lot from Melenda, so I'd like to hear your take on his game, particularly his grappling, if you've seen much tape on it.
Yeah, I mean, he comes across as a Muay Thai grappler and striker. He uses his reach. He's got a long reach. They actually both have a 76-inch reach from what I was able to get, and I was actually surprised that Griffin had such a long reach, because Melenda has that reputation of having a long reach. But Melenda uses the reach. He also is going to have a 3-inch height advantage here. I don't know much about Melenda, to be honest with you. He's 1-0. He had the KO in his one UFC fight. But the one thing that I think he needs to do better is keep his hands up, because he kind of uses his reach and keeps his hands down. And I think Max Griffin is a pretty good boxer. He's 2-2 in the UFC. He's got more UFC experience. Did lose to Colby Covington. Did lose to Zaleski, who those 2 guys are obviously pretty good fighters. He did beat Mike Perry, though, last time out. Now, Mike Perry hit him with some shots. He hit Mike Perry with some shots. Obviously, that went to decision. But he can obviously take a punch, and he can give a licking. So, again, if Melenda doesn't keep his hands up, Griffin can do damage with the boxing. But the thing with Melenda is he does damage with a lot of different strikes. Very active with his hands, very active with his feet. I just don't know if he strikes enough. I can see this going to decision, and I can see Max Griffin just outpointing him if he wants to point box him, because Melenda, I don't think, strikes enough. But that's basically my take on this. Based on the prices, just to go back to those prices, I kind of like Max Griffin as an underdog here. I think Melenda's fine for GPPs. I wouldn't play him in cash. I think he's fine for GPPs because he can get that flash knockout with his Muay Thai stance. But I really do like Max Griffin to get a win here using his boxing. I think he can point strike him there. Any idea, though, with GPPs, how you would play this fight?
I'll probably be looking towards Griffin, particularly if the tape is showing some question marks on striking defense from Melenda. Griffin's got a lot of power. I think most of his wins have been by knockout. Looks like 50%. Yeah. And his stats in the UFC not being great, part of that is that tough competition you were mentioning. Covington's obviously great, and Zaleski and Perry are both strong opponents. So if Melenda has issues with striking defense, Griffin could be a pretty good GPP play, just in terms of his low salary and his ability to score a knockout here.
Yeah, and I think his I forget who was Thiago Alves was his first opponent, and he wasn't very active either. So it was kind of a slow paced fight. I think this is going to be a little bit more high pace with Max Griffin's boxing background. All right, getting into the next fight. I really do actually like this fight. Rafael Assuncao and Rob Font. I don't know if you saw Rob Font today, but he basically said that he was going to knock out Assuncao. I'm sure a lot of people, call themselves for the knockout. But Assuncao is 9.1K, minus 165. Rob Font is 7.1K at a plus 145 underdog. I really like Rob Font here, but I think Assuncao is going to be too much for him. But what do you think here in this fight?
I think Assuncao's the kind of guy that gets underrated a lot. He's not a big name, but he's constantly fighting other big names. I mean, he's got win over Marlon Moraes, win over Aljamain Sterling, win over Brian Caraway. He even had that win over TJ Dillashaw, even though it was a few years ago. But yeah. I do think just the DK pricing makes Rob Font pretty appealing here. Assuncao's not a super scary finisher, and he's only he's like plus 500 to win inside the distance here. So even if Font loses, he's got those 3 rounds to score. And Font's striking pace is huge. 12.3 strike attempts per minute is top 5 on the card. And he combines it with 43% accuracy. So a lot of pace for Font. And decent chance to pull off an upset here. I mean, plus 145, just in terms of where he's priced on DraftKings, plus 145 is really good. You're not getting someone else with that good a line until you get up to Paul Felder, priced $300 more. So Font's a little bit cheaper than he should be, and combining that with his pace, I think, makes him appealing in just about any format.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said, and I think the price is off in this. I really wish the price was a little bit closer. I do like Assuncao to win, but I do think it's going to go to decision. You mentioned that Moraes fight. I mean, he hit Assuncao with some bombs in that fight, and he was able to just take him. So he's got a great chin. Rob Font obviously likes to switch stances. He likes to strike, and Assuncao's a counter striker. So I'm not calling for an Assuncao, finish, but I think he could get a finish if he's able to connect with Font because of the stylistic matchup here. As you mentioned, Assuncao has a victory over TJ Dillashaw. Dillashaw was able to win the rematch. Assuncao is 35 years old, so he is getting up there in age a little bit. In terms of the height, Rob Font's going to have a little height advantage and a little reach advantage, but it's never seemed to really be an issue for Assuncao in the past. He has good takedown defense. Rob Font has a good overhand right. I can see that maybe being an issue. I'm going back and forth here. I kind of like Assuncao, but I understand what you're saying. I can see you playing Rob Font in cash because I do think it's going to go 3 rounds.
Yeah, I like Assuncao to pick up the win. I just think it's a lot closer than I think it's closer than the betting lines have it, and I also think it's way closer than the DK pricing makes it look.
Yeah, I think the DK pricing is a little bit off here. A couple things with this fight. I'll leave it at this. 3 things, and then we'll move on. I think Rob Font needs to worry about the leg kicks early. I think Assuncao can get after him with leg kicks early. I think Rob Font's overhand right could be an issue, especially with the height advantage. And then Assuncao with his counter striking, I think that he can do some damage. Put a couple combinations together if Font's a little sloppy. But I agree with you. I think we're in agreement. This is going to go to distance. So yeah, it looks like Font, but in cash games, and maybe Assuncao. You can't play Assuncao at that price in cash games. I think you got to maybe throw him in some GPPs. Next fight. So we have Mike Perry and Paul Felder. So you want to talk about a DK price that is totally off. Mike Perry is 8.8 on DraftKings, 8.8 on DraftKings, I'm sorry, and a plus 130. I did this right before the show, so he's a plus 130 underdog. Paul Felder is 7.4K and a minus 150 favorite. So again, this begs the question, how do you play this in GPPs? Because Felder's going to be very, very popular. And you got to decide whatever number you think is, Felder's going to be played at, let's say 50%. I mean, there are some GPPs where he could be 40 or 50%. I think you got to either be under the field or over the field. You can't be with the field. But what do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to what stakes you're playing at. The higher up you get, it gets a little bit sharper. So if you're playing in some of those, the real high stakes GPPs where you're just looking at a field of 100 or 200 people, you could see Felder owned way up into like 60, 70% there. But if you're max entering something a little bit cheaper, the $10, the $1, I think we get Felder closer to 40 and 50%. And so I probably want to be above in those contests. He just stands out as such a strong value. I'm probably looking to get up around 60, 70% exposure, maybe more, depending how the value shakes out a little bit later on in the week.
Yeah, definitely. Now, who do you like to win this fight?
I like Felder to win it.
Yeah.
I think it's I was surprised to see the odds open like this, actually. I think the size advantage may not matter as much as it's being made out to seem. Felder's last 3 opponents, I think, were all either as tall or taller than Perry. And obviously someone like Charles Oliveira is not the kind of striker that Perry is, but Perry's got some shaky striking defense. I mean, scary knockout power, but eats a lot of strikes. He absorbs 4.8 per minute while he only lands 4.1. And Felder's a guy who's really, really good at landing with 43% accuracy, and obviously he's shown a ton of power in the lighter weight classes.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with Felder is he is coming up from 155 to fight this fight. I think they're at 170, right, for this fight?
Yeah.
Is it a catch weight or is it 170? It is 170.
I think it's just straight up 170.
Okay, so you just mentioned before, where did this fight open? I didn't.
I think it opened with Felder as a favorite. I'll just pull up the the exact number here. Yeah, Felder opened -145, and he got a lot of action came on him right away. He was down to 165 at one point before it kind of balanced out.
Okay, I didn't even realize he opened as a favorite. Somebody had posted on Twitter that they got Perry at plus money and Felder at plus money. So it was basically, I think it was Kelton on Twitter, basically said he was, it was free money there, but I don't know.
I really Bet Online opened Felder as an underdog. Actually, I didn't see that earlier.
Yeah, that may
5 times odds had him as a favorite.
Yeah, that may be what Kelton got, because he's basically playing with free money there.
Yeah.
Either way, I think Felder's in a great spot. I think this is a great stylistic matchup for Felder, and I think it's a poor matchup for Perry. I also think you had just touched on it. It's something I wrote down here. Perry's 0-2 in his last 2 fights. Both went the distance, and he took a lot of punishment in both of those fights, against Ponzinibbio and against Griffin. So, he's an emotional fighter. He's got a great chin, but, at some point the chin's going to break down. He also wears down as the fight goes on. He comes out with a lot of energy, a lot of emotion, like the first 7 minutes, and then he kind of, he pop shots after that. So I think Felder, if he can just get him into the second round, I think he's gonna be the better conditioned guy. He was also training for a fight, so it's just a matter of the weight cut is why this fight is at 170. It's not so much that he wasn't training and he's out of shape. It's just, and not for nothing, when I was at UFC Atlantic City, I was actually there for the weigh-ins. Paul Felder kind of jumped on the scale, joking around, because he was actually doing the telecast. And I think he weighed in at 180 something, 189 or something like that. So the guy walks around at 189 anyway. So he may even be more comfortable at 170. And he kind of knows what Mike Perry is going to, go after him with. He's got a good counter left hand, good counter right hand. He is a good straight right, puts together 2-piece combos. He's a boxer. He's also a blue belt BJJ, and has a pretty good spinning elbow from close distance. He finished Ricci, I believe, with that lead elbow. So I think this is a great fight for Felder. I really like him a lot. Unfortunately, I think everybody else is going to like him a lot. So we talked about where to play him and how to play him. I think you're right on the money with that. But I think you need to be. I think I'm going to go over the field. I'm not going to go less than the field. But I think you don't want to necessarily be even with the field, because you're just going to be tying everybody in that case anyway. But next fight, Paulo Costa and Uriah Hall. This is a fight that I believe was originally scheduled for UFC Atlantic City. And Uriah Hall had to pull out. This is when he either had a heart attack or heart attack symptoms during his weight cut, I believe, a few months ago. So Paulo Costa is -430. He's the favorite. 9.4K on Draftkings. Uriah Hall is +345. I'm sorry, +345 and 6.8K on Draftkings. Jay, where are you going with this one?
I find fights like this a little bit tough to break down. Costa hasn't fought much competition at all. His only real tough opponent was old man Johnny Hendricks, who was fighting above his weight class there. But Hall's fights have almost all been against great competition. Mousasi twice. He fought Whitaker. Thiago Santos. He's had a lot more tough fights than Costa has, and his offensive numbers, he doesn't have anywhere near the volume, but in terms of efficiency, it's similar. 53% accuracy for Hall, 56% for Costa, and Costa's defense has been pretty weak at 49%. But obviously, guys who pressure Hall have been able to make him tentative in the past. So I think Hall's counter striking just probably won't get the trick done, but with Costa's weak striking defense so far, at least the low rate, I think I like Hall as a GPP play just because he's so cheap here. You can do basically whatever you want if you put him in a lineup. I'm not going to have a lot of exposure to him, but he's someone I'm going to kind of sprinkle in a little bit for lineups where I want to get a guy like Ngannou in my lineup with Miocic.
So, Jay, you basically stole everything I was going to say right there. The one thing that I really want to reiterate that you just said, and again, you did it with the numbers. I did it just by watching video because I'm more of a video guy more than a numbers guy. But Costa is very hittable, very hittable. He took a lot of shots in some of his fights. But again, he's 3-0 in the UFC, and he fought Hendricks. He's so much bigger than Hendricks. And Hendricks doesn't, although he's a wrestler, he doesn't want to wrestle. He beat Ben Bose and McClellan, and they're nowhere near the caliber of fighter that Uriah Hall has fought. So I totally agree with you there. My only issue with Uriah Hall, because I really like Uriah Hall, is just where is he in terms of his head, in terms of, mentally with his head and then physically with his body. Because if you're telling me he literally had a heart attack, I don't know if he actually had a heart attack or heart attack symptoms. But either way, heart attack symptoms could be because you had a heart attack. So I don't know where exactly he was with that last fight. It's a little scary to play him. And don't get me wrong, Paul Costa, when that fight was originally scheduled, I was excited to see Costa. When I watched the tape on Hall, he doesn't throw a lot. So when you're talking about Uriah Hall, you had mentioned he's a counter striker, and he is 100% a counter striker, but he's the kind of guy that will get hit 5 times before he even counters. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit different. It's not like he's going to counter strike every single time, Costa closes distance. Costa can close the distance 3 times and end this fight before Hall even gets a punch off. So that's my other concern with Hall. But again, this is 100% to me a GPP fight. I really do believe, based on what I've seen on tape, that Hall can 100% win this fight, and this price is off. But I don't know what Uriah Hall is coming out there. So, I 100% agree with everything you just said. I probably went way too long if I was just going to agree with you, but let's move on to this next fight. This next fight, I think, is a little bit of a wild card, I guess is the best way to say. We have Gokhan Saki and Khalil Roundtree. Saki got a lot – there was a big hype train on Saki coming in. And he came out, and I thought he was going to get finished. I mean, I remember watching the fight originally, and then I just rewatched the fight 2 days ago, and I really thought he was going to get finished. He basically leans back against the cage and just lets go of some haymakers and hits him on the chin and knocks him out with that big left hand. So Saki's minus 135. He's 8.4K. Roundtree is plus 115 underdog from Vegas, too. So this is a home fight for him, 7.8K. So, Jay, where you got this one going?
This one's tricky. I think Roundtree, he hasn't shown us any sort of wrestling in the UFC. He's not attempted a single takedown, at least that one that registered officially on the stats. But Saki also just looked surprisingly hittable in that debut. Like you were saying, he looked like he was going to get finished. And I mean, it's not like Henrique da Silva is a great striker or anything. So I don't think Roundtree's very good. He's a guy that's known for his power and striking, but lands barely more than 2 strikes a minute and really inaccurate. And he's also been really hittable in the UFC with a 39% defense rate. So I want to like a UFC veteran against a guy who's coming over from kickboxing, but I think this matchup has been kind of custom made to give Saki another good shot at getting a highlight reel win.
I'll be honest with you, I think this is a KO fight, so I think you're going to play it both ways in GPPs. You go back and you look, Saki actually had an MMA fight before that UFC fight, and he lost in a regional event to a guy named James Zikic. I think it is Zikic. I wasn't able to find it on YouTube. I'm going to look again, though, to see if I can find it. He kind of has a reputation. They call him the Turkish Tyson, switches stances, very good striking with his obviously his punches and his legs. But he gassed early, and Roundtree gasses early. So this could be a terrible fight if it gets, into the middle of the second round. Like, they could just both, well, I guess I hate to say it, but that's basically what Saki did the first time, right? He just leaned back against the cage and threw some bombs and eventually hit him. But even if you look at Roundtree, he's 2-3. He's looked bad in his losses, and even in his 2 wins, he beat a guy in Jolly who's 0-3 and out of the UFC, and he beat Paul Craig, who everybody knows if you just don't go to the ground with Paul Craig, you win the fight. Unfortunately, some people don't know that, and probably cost me money on Draftkings. But, that's basically what it is. Like, Paul Craig just goes for flash subs. I think Roundtree was the one who actually knocked out Paul Craig and then stood over him a little bit while he was knocked out. I think he took some shit for that too. The numbers are more or less the same. Roundtree will have a little bit of a reach advantage. Saki's actually 34 years old for a guy who's only has 2 MMA fights. I think this is a GPP fight. I think it's going to finish, and I could see it finish in first or second round. I really don't want to see much more than 2 rounds of this, because once they get tired, it's going to be a bad-looking fight. So let's move on to this next one. Next one is Anthony Pettis and Michael Chiesa. This is actually a fight I covered UFC 223 also. I was actually standing at the front of the Barclays Center when Conor McGregor ran in. I actually got video of it. But this is a fight that was scheduled for that card, and I interviewed both of those guys at the media scrum, and then obviously what happened with Conor and Chiesa getting injured, it got called off. But Chiesa's 8.6K minus 155. Pettis is 7.6K plus 135. So Jay, we're getting into the nuts and bolts of this main card here. 4 good fights in a row. So where are you going with this fight?
Yeah, Pettis is a guy earlier in his career. I didn't think he was as good as the credit he was getting. I think his flashiness and his finishes had people believing he was a little bit better than he was. And I wasn't super surprised when he started to pick up a few losses, but I think it's gotten to the point now that he might even be underrated. I might be on the opposite side of the Anthony Pettis train as I used to be. I think Chiesa deserves to be a favorite in this fight. He's a dangerous guy, but I think he's really hittable. Again, this is a bit of a trend on this card is guys with weak defense against really accurate strikers. And Pettis' volume is never great, but obviously he's got that finish potential. And against a guy in Chiesa that tends to get hit, I think I like Pettis on DK here, just because I think with the betting odds being a little far apart, Pettis probably a little bit underpriced.
And one of the things that I actually wrote down is I think Anthony Pettis is going to have a strength advantage. I don't see Michael Chiesa as a very strong guy. He's got a long jet. He's going to have a little bit of a height advantage, Chiesa, and a little bit of a reach advantage. But I don't see him as the stronger fighter or the stronger physically guy. I see Chiesa's his path to victory is really by sub. I don't know if this stays on the feet. I think Pettis is going to wind up getting the best of him. Now, don't get me wrong. If Chiesa can get him down for 2 rounds, he can win a decision. Winning 2 of the 3 rounds from the ground. But I kind of like Chiesa to maybe try to clinch up a little bit, use the fence to drag him down, use his BJJ game. But I think that Pettis is actually stronger than him. So it's a tough fight for me to call. I don't think I'm going to play this in cash at all, especially with the some of the value at the lower end of the card. I won't play this in cash. I guess I'll play Chiesa, in GPPs and maybe even Pettis in a few GPPs, but I don't really see him knocking him out. I see him winning by decision if he's going to win. So, it's a fight that on paper, it's 2 names that everybody kind of knows. Pettis is a former champ, but I don't know. He's 2-5 in his last 7 fights. And, I think he kind of struggles to really get any offense going from the ground. So I like Chiesa if he can get it to the ground. So I'll leave it at that. So the next fight, we got 3 left. We got the return of Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis. So Francis is minus 380 favorite, 9.3K. Derek Lewis is the 6.9K underdog at plus 315. So Jay, what do you think about this one?
I hope this fight ends early because when Derek Lewis fights go long, they're not fun. Lewis is surprisingly good. When I look at the stats, it always kind of surprises me, his offensive numbers. 6.1 strike attempts per minute. It's low in general, but if you just consider that he's a heavyweight that throws with power, that's pretty high. And 51% striking accuracy is really good. Ngannou's a guy who's tough to just look at the numbers at because most of his time in the UFC was that Stipe Miocic fight, and that taking on the best fighter at heavyweight is obviously gonna hurt your stats in a lot of areas. So if we don't look at that, he's got pretty good striking defense at 60% and really precise striking to go with his accuracy, 47% to go with that power. Sorry, and he lands more than twice as many strikes as he absorbs. Lewis is a guy who doesn't have great defense, 48% striking defense. It's just that his opponents are usually afraid to throw because they're afraid to get tagged. I don't think Ngannou's going to be a guy who's going to get scared to go toe-to-toe. I think if they brawl, he's probably going to have confidence that he can finish it here. And he's also, Lewis will sometimes get in there and go for a takedown, and Ngannou's got pretty good takedown defense. Only Curtis Blades and Stipe Miocic have managed to take him down, so not exactly embarrassing names to get taken down by.
I think one of the things that we have to kind of be wary of with Francis is what improvements did he make? You know what I mean? He was at the top of the world. He had a big fight. He had the championship fight against Stipe. And I think after that fight, he kind of took a lot of shit for not being able to defend Stipe's takedowns and just kind of getting grounded out and gassing out. And then after the fight, he goes on a couple shows. You get some people, I don't know if they talk to him or his camp or whatever, and it basically says he didn't even, really train in wrestling in the camp. He was saying at the Performance Institute, I think went over to France right before. So now where is he training for this fight? There's a lot of unknowns with Francis. He has that big, obviously overhand right. He has big punching power. He was able to, I think he had the knockout of the year against Alistair Overeem, right? I'm pretty sure basically everybody picked that one. I want to see him, I want to see his improvements. I think this is going to end early, so I don't think you have anything to worry about there. Derek Lewis is very, very confident. You hear him talk and about this stuff. He loves his money, and he's very confident. Those are two things I can tell you about Derek Lewis. The conventional wisdom says you got to try to take Francis down, right? You don't want to get hit because you may only get hit with 1 or 2 shots, and that could be it. So you kind of want to take Francis down. But again, like you just said, I think it was a 0.65 takedown average you mentioned or something like that.
Yeah.
So Derek Lewis just doesn't do that. So, what he's supposed to do, he doesn't do well. And then what improvements does Francis make? So what are they going to do? They're going to come out and they're going to throw. So what I noticed on tape is that Derek Lewis likes to drop his head real low when you come with an overhead right. So if Francis Ngannou comes with a big overhand right and Derek Lewis sees it, he's going to drop his head down. What Francis should do is just, bury a knee right into him, stand him back up, and then come with another overhand right or a combination. And this fight could be over very, very early. So keep a lookout for Derek Lewis's head. When Francis comes with that first overhand right, he tends to drop his head. We'll see what Francis, who does his tape study, because if I noticed it and I'm just an amateur tape study guy, I'm pretty sure the experts are going to be able to see that. But again, Francis has that he's 11-2. He has the 1 loss to Stipe. I just don't think Derek Lewis is going to be able to get him the same way. And I think Lewis is going to – I don't think he's going out there looking to get knocked out. I think he's going out there looking to kind of grind out, maybe get into that second round. So, I think Francis can just put him away early. That's really what I think. I think this line is priced for Francis to knock him out. But let's get into the – yeah.
On DK, I like that too. For Ngannou, he's just minus 380 favorite with I think second best line to finish on the card. And I think it's unlikely enough that Lewis does manage to grind him into the 3rd round. I think if Lewis sticks around, he's still going to be getting picked apart a little bit in the 1st. And I think that makes Ngannou a really strong play in both cash and GPP.
Oh, yeah. And he could definitely get 1 or 2 even if he doesn't knock him out, he can definitely get 1 or 2 knockdowns before he gets that knockout too, which again, you're getting 10 points for each knockdown.
Yeah.
So I think 100%. Now, these next 2 fights, I'll be honest with you, I think they're clear as day watching on film. But let's go with the co-main first. Max Holloway is 8.3K, minus 131. Brian Ortega is 7.9K, plus 121. Again, Ortega's 14-0. He's undefeated. Holloway's 19-3. And again, he started fighting high-level guys at a very young age. But, Jay, who do you like in this fight?
Yeah, so I'm mostly just going to look at stats for the last 5 years for Holloway. Like you said, he started fighting at a super young age. So that'll be his last 13 fights I'm mostly focusing in on here. And he's just incredible across the board as far as the numbers go. He averages 13.7 strike attempts per minute, which is absolutely ridiculous. And he's landed almost 50% of those. And then if we kind of expand to his whole career for a second, he has the most strikes landed per minute in featherweight history with 6.2. And 3rd in strike differential per minute. So that's strikes landed minus strikes absorbed. So even including Conor McGregor, Holloway might be the best striker at featherweight right now since Aldo's on the decline. And he's also got a really strong 86% takedown defense rate. I've seen a lot of people high on Ortega, and maybe there's been some improvements in his last couple fights that I haven't quite noticed, haven't picked up on, but I'm just not seeing. I'm not seeing this one being quite as close as the betting lines have it. I love Holloway here.
You know what? I totally agree with you. And again, this is what I basically said. These next 2 fights, I see them clear as day. Max Holloway just has world-class experience. He has world-class striking. He's able to keep distance. The only time I've even seen him struggle at all was with Jose Aldo in that first round, maybe first round and a half in that first fight. Other than that, I haven't seen Holloway. And again, I'm not even going to count the McGregor fight, but you talked about that, and that was a great fight. But Holloway went the distance with McGregor, and short notice replacement in that fight, I believe also. Holloway will not go to the ground. So again, if Ortega how is he going to get him to the ground? Ortega doesn't really have that takedown ability. He was able to get a couple guys to the ground and get subs, but he was basically able to lock them in from standing positions. He's not the kind of guy that really goes and shoots double legs or single legs. So how is he going to get Holloway down if he's keeping distance? Even when Holloway knocked Pettis down, he didn't even jump on top of him. He hit Pettis with a counter right, knocked him down, and basically told the ref to get him back up. So Holloway's smart. He knows where his strength is. He measures distance very well. And again, like you just mentioned about Ortega, where has his improvements come from? Not for nothing, but last summer he fought Moicano. Moicano had him beat. He was up 2 rounds. He was basically up 3 rounds. I mean, he was winning that 3rd round. For whatever reason, Moicano goes in and tries to go for a takedown. Ortega, I believe, put him in a guillotine. I'm pretty sure that's how he finished that fight last summer. I have no idea what Moicano was doing, but Ortega loses that fight. Cub Swanson outstruck him. He outstruck Ortega, so he got outstruck by Moicano, got outstruck by Swanson. He was able to get Swanson in the sub. And then again, you go to the Frankie Edgar fight, and for the most part, Frankie Edgar was outstriking him. I mean, it was a closer outstriking, but he was outstriking him. And how did Brian Ortega hit him? He caught him with an inside, I believe it was an inside elbow, because again, Frankie Edgar's shorter, his reach is shorter, so he has to get inside. And Brian Ortega hit him with an elbow. So don't get me wrong. He finished the fight. It was a great fight for him, but I think he's getting outstruck, and that's what Holloway's strength is. So when it's a stylistic matchup, I just don't see how Brian Ortega is going to beat Holloway unless he's able to get him in some kind of a sub. He's not knocking Holloway out. And I don't understand how he's going to get the sub because Holloway keeps distance and Ortega doesn't really show that he can take people down. So I think Ortega belongs in this fight. He's been great so far in the UFC, so is Holloway. But I just think this is going to be an easy win for Holloway. He's going to outstrike him. And the good part about this fight, and I know you mentioned it earlier in the podcast, I think you can play both sides of this fight. You can play Ortega in cash if you want. You may even want to stack it. I think it's going to probably go to 4 or 5 rounds. Again, if Holloway does damage on Ortega and Ortega gets a little antsy, if he goes down 2 or 3 rounds, he may try to kind of struggle a takedown or push him up against the fence to get a takedown. Again, maybe he's made improvements and he's trying to get Holloway down. I'm going to say that his coaches are probably telling him, you're not the better striker here. You need to mix it up. You need to do something else. But obviously it's going to start on the feet. So I give round 1 to Holloway, and then we'll see what happens after that. But I do like this fight in cash. I like Holloway in cash a lot. Last fight of the night, Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier. I love both of these guys. But again, I see this clear as day, so I'll throw it to you first. But Stipe's minus 230. Minus 230. He's 8.9K on DraftKings. Cormier is plus 210 and 7.3K on DraftKings. A lot of people are giving him Cormier a lot of love on Twitter. He did start his career at heavyweight. I believe he was like 13-0 at heavyweight before he went to 205. You may have a better idea of those numbers. But what do you think about these two guys?
Stipe hasn't fought a tough grappler like he's getting in Cormier here, but I just think what he has shown in his fights against lesser grapplers, I mean, 78% takedown defense is very solid, and DC's a great wrestler. He controls the fight really well when they hit the ground, but he's not aggressive with his wrestling. He averages 4.4 takedown attempts per 15 and only lands 1.9. So if he's getting his takedown stuff, he's shown a real tendency to be happy to sit back and strike for a while. And Miocic might be the best striker in heavyweight history. I mean, 52% striking accuracy, lands 4.4 per minute. And if DC's going to sit back and not just go all out on those takedown attempts, and even that might not work against a solid wrestler in Miocic. I think he's a little bit underrated there. He's just going to have a lot of trouble hanging in there. And I think it's the kind of fight where Stipe's volume can just build up over a few rounds and he could score a late finish here, which would be huge for DK purposes, getting a lot of strikes landed.
Now, when you say late finish, you're talking third, fourth? What round do you think?
Third or fourth is what I'd give a guess at.
Okay. I heard both of these guys last week on the Ariel Helwani podcast. I was in shock that Daniel Cormier is 245 pounds. So he's basically at 245, and he thinks he's going to come in at about 240 for this fight. He may be heavier than Stipe coming into this fight. So that's the only thing that I'm concerned with. But again, Stipe is going to have a 5-inch height advantage and a 7.5-inch reach advantage. So he is the heavyweight champ. True heavyweights, I mean, he puts them all, he kind of puts them all on their ass. You know what I mean? He knows how to box. He's strong. He uses a lot of feints. He can be attacked with the low kick. That's one thing that maybe Cormier wants to do, kind of get after him with the low kick. Cormier is going to have obviously the center of gravity advantage there. So maybe he gets after him early, tries to work the body, get into the later rounds. But in his fight versus Werdum, it was hard. Stipe basically said it's hard to do jiu-jitsu when you're getting punched in the face. I think it's the same thing with Cormier. It's going to be hard to get those wrestling takedowns when you're getting punched in the face. Mike Tyson once said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and I think that's what Stipe just does. He knows how to fight. He's going to keep you at distance, especially with Cormier. He's going to keep him at distance. He's not going to go to the ground. He's a beast. He steps forward and he boxes. It's technical. It's legit. I just don't see a way for Cormier to. I don't know what his path to victory is. So I'll throw it back at you. And I know you kind of said Stipe late, but is there a path to victory for Cormier? Is it basically just to kind of get a split decision?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see Cormier get really aggressive with his wrestling here. I think that's where his chance lies. He fighting around 240, weighing in like that, like you were saying. I think that's about what he was fighting at in Strikeforce before he started thinking about 205. I know he weighed in about 240 against Barnett, about 240 against Bigfoot, and kind of in that range for his last two fights before that. And he, even still, he'll have some strength advantage, I think, but I don't think it'll be huge. And Miocic, yeah, if Cormier can get into the clinch, maybe control him against the fence for a bit and grind out a bit of an ugly decision, that would be his path to victory that I could see. But for the most part, Miocic is a good enough defensive grappler that Cormier won't be able to land big ground and pound, I don't think. It's going to be more control. And, I mean, maybe, I don't know what the line on the prop would be. Like a Cormier submission could be, something we haven't seen in a while, but could be viable there. But for the most part, it's tough to see a really likely path to victory for him here.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. So Jay, I appreciate you coming on. I'm gonna just mention one of the sponsors. BetMMA.tips is one of the people. It's not really a sponsor. It's more just a partnership that we have. The two of us. He retweets my stuff and everything. I'm hoping have a couple meetings. I'm hoping to get a sponsor or two for the show to upgrade things a little bit. Get on iTunes. Get on Spotify in the future. But I really do appreciate you coming on the show. I've noticed the work you've done. I've noticed the visuals that you've put out with all the stats that you just mentioned right now, and I'm sure you mentioned during the week as the fight get closer. But why don't you just promote some of the stuff that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I go basically anywhere you like to hop on social media. I try to get some UFC stats up there. So you can find me Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Those are all at Numbers MMA. And then I've got a DK podcast and just a general slate breakdown for every card that I get up on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher. So anywhere you're looking for info, you can find me. I'm also gonna be streaming on Twitch this week if you want to just hop into a chat and have a bit more casual Q&A if you have any questions about the fights this week for anyone. And Saturday afternoon, I'll also hop on YouTube live for a Q&A if you're finalizing your Draftkings lineups.
Perfect, Jay. Thanks for coming on, and we definitely have to do it again.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time. Look forward to being back.